And I think some of the problems we're seeing in the world at the moment, where people resort to terrorism, are symptomatic of a tension about the divide between the haves and the have-nots.
One of the explanations is that basically it's a force driven by Islamic extremism, Islamic fundamentalism, from an Islam which is deeply disillusioned and about the way in which it has been overtaken in the world by the West in terms of accomplishments in science and ideas and democracy and everything. And it's a sort of irrational lashing out against Western success that is driving international terrorism. The second explanation, by contrast, is that it's not that at all. What it is a final convulsive rejection of the consistent outside meddling and interference by major Western powers in the Middle East, which has gone on now for about 150 or 200 years.
It's deeply provoked by the lack of cultural sensitivity, the grab for land and water and oil in the Middle East.
Successive imperial powers, France, Britain, Italy, and later the Soviet Union, and now the United States, have all at one time or another sought to manipulate the region in ways to serve their own interests, to impose their own version of order there.
And so what you're dealing here is huge grievance that goes back hundreds of years. You're dealing with inequality.
What citizens want is pretty much the same all around the world. What citizens want is freedom of movement and freedom of thought. They want freedom of choice, and they want justice.
It's no coincidence that terrorists tend to get a foothold in countries which are quite poor.
In the poor, that's where it's easy to get somebody like Osama bin Laden or similar can get the attention of the poor because they don't have their freedom of choice, and they'll want it, and they'll want that, and so their requirements are no different than yours and mine.
And they also live in a rapidly globalizing era, so we have a situation which is unprecedented in human history, because the have-nots are becoming increasingly aware of just how much the haves have got.
For most countries in the world, international terrorism is not their #1 preoccupation. Most of them, for the very great majority, it's building their nations, it's earning prosperity, it's trying to get access to resources, overcoming internal dissension and strife. Indonesia is a good example of that, and not international terrorism as such.
Last year, maybe 400 people in the world died of terrorism. That's a terrible thing. And 400,000 died from floods, and this many died from forest fires, and this many people died because they had a repressive government, which was or wasn't supported by the international community. And let's just keep these things in perspective, and let's not get whipped up into hysteria about terrorism just because terrorism is a sort of suiting some people's agenda at the moment, to pursue their view of the world and to justify their actions.
International terrorism has become the sort of unifying issue. At least the United States is trying to make it that. Either you are with us or against us on this issue. They're trying to, in a sense, recreate the situation you had in the Cold War, where you had the Soviet Union and the United States, and either you're on one side or the other. That was a much more complex situation, and one where you could make a very good case for that sort of approach. But international terrorism is not nearly such a strong or robust issue to build that around.
And you constantly crank up a level of fear in the population about threats to security, which are only solved apparently by military force.
1/6 of the world's population goes to bed each night, if they have a bed, hungry. You have to try to address the political causes which many of these terrorist groups are cynically feeding off. In other words, issues such as injustice and issues such as poverty. These are issues which have to be engaged if we're going to make the world a safer place.
In the sort of extent of the poverty that we're talking about in the Indian subcontinent and in Africa and in the Middle East is unlikely, it would seem to me, to going to be sorted out by an economic solution.
And if you look at the structures which support that inequality, that says a lot about, it's a large explanation of why you have the military forces that you have. That's why the United States, which is the largest net receiver of other countries' resources, has got more military force than most other countries in the world put together.
We now have a world in which there is only one superpower. We all understand that. What are the implications of it, though?